Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I quite often stand at this lectern, but on this occasion I have to remember what hat I'm wearing, and the hat I'm wearing this evening is as a trustee of the David Hume Institute. Any other office that you think I occupy, you can regard as irrelevant for the purposes of this evening's proceedings. And I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the DHI to the fifth of our annual Politicians and Professionals series. This year, as I think you'll all know, we're hearing from the leaders of each of Scotland's main parties on Scotland after Brexit. Let me start by thanking our various sponsoring organisations. In no particular order, the Faculty of Advocates, the Royal Society of Edinburgh, the Faculty of Actuaries, the Law Society and the Young Academy of Scotland. I'd particularly like to thank my colleague Rebecca Widderfield, who is the Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and she will be chairing this evening's proceedings after I hand over. There are also many people involved in making this series work: Tim Mounser, Andrew Tregoning, Tess Joyce, Morven Chisholm, Julie Steele, Graham Herbert and many others. We just couldn't get this show on the road without them. Our order of business this evening will be a speech from Willie Rennie, which will last for around half an hour, followed by 30 to 40 minutes of questions and answers. And that part of the session will be opened with a question from Emma Boffey, who's a member of the Young Academy of Scotland. Following the Q&A, you'll have to put up with me for a brief vote of thanks. And then Dr. Alice Koenig, who's a senior lecturer in Latin and Classical Studies at St Andrews and also a member of the Young Academy, will take a couple of minutes just to speak about the work of the Young Academy of Scotland. We hope to have you out there with a glass in your hand by 7:30 p.m. at the latest. Can I remind you, please, to turn your phones to off or at the very least silent? There is a rule in this building that if I'm conducting proceedings or in any way involved, if your phone goes off, it's a £25 to a charity of my choice, and I will reveal it to you if any of you is foolish enough to allow it to happen. So let me turn to our speaker. We're very fortunate to have Willie Rennie with us. He's been a member of the Scottish Parliament since 2006, and he's been leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats since 2011. As I say, Willie will speak for about half an hour, and then it'll be over to you for questions and answers. Willie, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alan. So this series of lectures is called Scotland and After Brexit. I'm not going to speak about that. I'm not going to accept the premise of the title of the series of lectures. If I started talking about life after Brexit, people might think that even I had conceded that it was inevitable, that somehow it was irreversible, that we could not go back. So I'm not going to talk about that this evening, especially as in 2018, people are starting to think again. And we know that Article 50 can be stopped. It's remarkable. I would say that after 20 months on from that vote in June 2016, that the UK government is still no clearer on what it wants to achieve by Brexit beyond, I would say, broad wishful thinking and formulaic incantations. So today I'm going to look at the new evidence on the costs of Brexit. I'm going to show how the public is taking note of these costs and that minds are changing. I will set out what needs to happen to allow the public mood to be given a voice. I will take the time to talk about the value of immigration, which is perhaps the biggest and most controversial Brexit issue, yet not properly debated. And finally, I will suggest how, if we can have a future without Brexit, we cannot just go back to the way things were before. So perhaps, after all, I will be talking about the future, not, I hope, after Brexit, but after the Brexit debate. David Hume said, "A wise man apportions his beliefs to the evidence." So I want to use my first section this evening to set out some of the new evidence of the impact of Brexit. There's a lot of it. I struggle to decide which order to put these in because there's so much of it. So let's just take them as they come. Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, has said that the UK economy has lost £200 million a week in growth because of Brexit. At Davos, he was clear that £10 billion had been forfeited in GDP since June 2016. The IMF confirms that the UK is underperforming. The tragedy is that this has happened just as the rest of the world experiences a burst in growth. In fact, one of the few positives in the economy is that export figures have improved because of surging growth elsewhere in the world. And I don't think people signed up to become a servant state that relies on the purchasing power of booming foreign economies. St Andrews University has found that small and medium-sized enterprises are likely to be hit the hardest by Brexit. Academics found that smaller entrepreneurs and the supposed growth superstars of innovative and export-orientated companies are the most concerned about investment. The CBI's Director General, Caroline Fairbairn, has warned that losing the customs union through a no-deal Brexit would increase costs on UK goods sold to the EU by between £4 billion and £6 billion a year, and imported goods tariffs between £11 billion and £13 billion. The cost of regulatory red tape and border delay would be even greater. So this is all bad news on the horizon, but it's not just on the horizon, we're actually living with it right now. And against that, the Scottish economy is worryingly flat. The Scottish Government's chief economist, Gary Gillespie, produced a report in January, growth at 0.2% in Q3. And he said it's notably below its long-term trend. The outlook for business investment plans remains fragile, and labour productivity fell. And finally, consumer sentiment remains weak. So it's not good in Scotland either. So you don't need to have followed all of those numbers because it's all been written down now. All of this has been brought together for us by the UK government. They've set out in a series of papers that show how our UK economy will suffer between 8% and 2% depending on the details of the final deal. Worse off under every single scenario. The Scottish Government has a set of papers too that show how our economy will suffer between 8% and 2%, depending on the details of the final deal. For once, the Scottish and UK governments agree about something. But I don't think that's a coincidence. This is the 5th year that the David Hume Institute has held this winter series of lectures. It's the 5th time I'm going to use the following paragraph. And I can't believe I'm having to use the same paragraph yet again. It's the same words. I've said them in every single lecture. In 2014, it was a warning to the SNP about independence. In 2015, it was a warning to the UK about Brexit. For 2017, it was the UK again. And this is what I said. Our relationship with the EU was at risk. I said how we are part of a European market with 500 million customers worth trillions. I warned of the border effect between the United States and Canada had reduced trade by 44%. Simply having a border harms trade and hits businesses and consumers with costs. It weakens growth. This year, I am aiming those words at both the Scottish Government and the UK Government. We have two governments who each ignore inconvenient facts. The UK Government ignore the cost and try to hide it. The economic damage of leaving the EU single market. And the SNP ignore the cost of Scotland dismantling the UK single market. They unite to cheer figures which simply confirm that the UK and Scottish prosperity is dependent on Eurozone prosperity, or perhaps dependent on the 7 to 9% of GDP growth in India and China. Or they celebrate increased tourism because of the collapse of the pound. I wouldn't say it's very positive ambition for our country. Says the UK government, we haven't modelled our new outstanding bespoke model yet. But the question is, why haven't they? Why on earth haven't you modelled the bespoke model that you seek? Surely any government would want to settle the nerves of everyone in the country by revealing the huge potential of such a deal. Even a wildly optimistic best-case scenario would be a start, but they haven't. And we know why they haven't. It's because there is no such deal that would boost trade, that would grow our economy, and would make us better off. And they're fooling nobody but themselves. As I recorded earlier, David Hume said, "A wise man apportions his beliefs to the evidence." People are wise. Opinion is changing. Straight after the 2016 referendum, support for a vote on the deal, on the final deal, was tiny. Even last summer, people were against it. Now that's changed. Now it's 58% in favour. I've watched it grow month by month. The Guardian poll was a landmark. Every age group, except pensioners, in every part of the country, not just Scotland. I've been calling for the opportunity for the public to be able to veto a bad deal, to exit from Brexit in all that time. But even my closest and most cheerful confidants are not telling me that it's down to my efforts over the last few months. So what is going on? I think it's like this. There is a section of the population who does think that when a decision is made, you simply have to get on with it, especially if it sounds like there is no choice and no way back. In the aftermath of the referendum, that section of people will have thought it's over and it's decided. After Article 50 was triggered, those people would have thought there's no way back, it can't be stopped. But by 2018, people are thinking again. Because we know Article 50 can be stopped. The man who wrote it, Lord Kerr, the UK's former ambassador to the EU, has set out very clearly how it's possible to reverse course. We have heard very clearly how we can get out of this mess. Now in 2018, we can feel the early consequences of Brexit and have also seen evidence of what is likely to happen next. We have seen how the architects of Brexit in the Conservative Party have no clue about what they want or how they are going to get it. Britain is at the mercy of the warring factions in the Conservative Party. It is therefore little surprise that people are beginning to think they've had enough of it. It's the economy, I would suggest, that's the driver. Look at the shift in Sir John Curtis's, we have to call him Sir John now, Sir John Curtis's public opinion survey released in December. The number of people who now expect a bad deal has shot up from 37% to 52% right across the UK. Again, not just in Scotland. Concerns are now just as strong in the rest of the UK as they are here. The Guardian poll showed more people expect Brexit to harm the economy than help it. That's the case in every part of the UK and in every age group apart from pensioners. In fact, apart from those over the age of 75. The queue for a public vote on the deal is growing. Most people want one. Most people fear for the economy if we don't get one. Everyone who wants that to happen needs to make sure they stand up and be counted, and that moment will be very soon. Look at the list of people who are prepared to say this is important. Andrew Adonis, Peter Hain, and John Major, who called it credible. Some people hedge and say they can see the arguments, but stop short. People like Nicola Sturgeon, Mike Russell, Diane Abbott. Just this week, we saw the new supporters on Andrew Marr's couch, Chuka Muna and Anna Soubry. David Hume wrote, "There is no such thing as freedom of choice unless there is freedom to refuse." Well, the time is coming fast when people should have the freedom to refuse a bad Brexit deal. People need to get on board. The national interest can be saved. So support for a Brexit deal referendum is growing in the country. There is a new argument that has crystallised in recent weeks that might encourage even more people to step up to support a Brexit deal referendum. And it's the UK government that has presented the facts. The new assessments show that it is the poorest parts of the country that will be hit hardest with Brexit. The North East, West Midlands, the North West, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales will see an above-average reduction compared with other parts of the country. So not only will Brexit make everyone poorer, but it will exacerbate the divisions in our country. We will be poorer, we will be more divided, and will be rejecting our neighbours. And the Labour leadership is just letting it happen. I know many in the Labour Party feel very frustrated by Jeremy's approach to Europe. His long-standing Bennite antipathy, his lacklustre participation in the referendum, his failure to put any real pressure on the Conservative government, his oscillating position on our future relationship with our neighbours. When we look back at this time, people will be astonished at the leader of the opposition. It cannot stand by as we are made poorer, are more divided, and are rejecting our neighbours. So my warning to Labour moderates is this. The people are running ahead of the People's Party. People want the final say on Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn is not playing a long game on Brexit. He does not have a master plan to swing into action at the last minute. You will get to the last minute. You will check your watch, and he won't be there, but Brexit will be there. It is time for pro-EU progressives in the Labour Party to speak out. To those who are angry and frustrated with their leadership, now is the time to speak out. Vague complaints about Brexit won't be enough. You need to show how to escape from it. Join us to make that case before it's too late. But the SNP must end the hesitation too. They have set up independence as their Brexit escape chute, but they must know two important facts. A Brexit deal referendum for the whole UK has a better chance of success than an independence referendum. Support for a UK-wide vote has a 14-point lead, a margin that the SNP could only dream of for independence. Breaking from the UK at the time that the UK is breaking from the EU would be a level of turmoil that would be deeply damaging. Giving up on the UK's position in the EU would be as damaging for an independent Scotland as it would be for the rest of the United Kingdom. I appreciate that SNP do not support the continuation of the United Kingdom, but it's surely in all our interests for the whole of the British Isles and Ireland to remain in the EU. I would say now is the time for unity. So the SNP should put aside their antipathy to the UK for once and support a Brexit deal referendum that is in all our interests. I mentioned just now that it is the economy that is the driver. Immigration and the economy are fundamentally connected. I want to thank the Scottish Government for publishing its Scotland's Place in Europe paper earlier this year. It's quite powerful. Actually, I don't often say that about government papers, but it's quite powerful. It says, the overwhelming number of EU nationals in Scotland make a dynamic and positive contribution. Couldn't agree more. On average, they contribute £10,400 in government revenue. Each additional EU citizen working in Scotland contributes a further £34,400 in GDP. Those are astonishing figures. But I also want to pay tribute to the Young Academy of the Royal Society of Edinburgh for their series of papers on Brexit that were published last year. They were very powerful, particularly the case studies that were produced. There was almost tears in my eyes with some of the contributions that were made to that paper, and I used it in Parliament on a couple of occasions in immigration debates, and they were well received by fellow parliamentarians. So thank you very much for that work. And with Scotland's population ageing, we will all need younger migrants to live and work in Scotland as the rest of us get older, to take care of us and to take care of the country's bills. EU nationals who come here tend to be bright, healthy and working. They also tend not to have families here. Many go home once they've earned enough. They are not a burden to our welfare, health or education system. They have helped turn around the long-term decline in Scotland's population and mitigate the effects of an ageing society. The demographic challenge Scotland faces will see more deaths than births every year for the next 25 years. By 2041, there is projected to be as many as 10,000 more deaths than births that year. Migration could account for all of Scotland's population growth over that period to 2041. These are quite astonishing figures. Ensuring EU citizens are free to continue to live and work here is essential for maintaining that population growth, which underpins future economic growth and the sustainability of our public services. In Fife, I know this. I see that amazing range of industry and enterprise that is damaged by the threat to EU migration. Take Allen Hill Fruit Farm outside St Andrews. It has 500 EU workers at the peak of the summer season. Pittenweem, 200. Barnsmuir Neil Crail, 270 workers. This is almost as big as companies like Bifab and Babcock down at Rosyth. Since the Brexit vote, these farms have been struggling to get the workforce that they need. Their workers have faced a pay cut because of the fall in the value of the pound against the euro that followed the Brexit decision. The distance from home and the Scottish weather become more important when you don't get paid as much. And they are wondering whether Britain really wants them here when they hear that immigrants are a problem. This is not just Fife. 10,000 EU nationals work in the food and drink sector across Scotland. In 10 years, the sector has grown 44% to £14 billion. The Scottish Food and Drink Strategy aims to double that by 2030 to £30 billion. That will be almost impossible without the workforce to drive that growth. At St Andrews University, just down the road from Allen Hill Fruit Farm, 1/5 of the staff come from elsewhere in Europe, and just over 10% of all students are from the EU. The university's exposure to Brexit is huge. So Professor Sally Mapstone, the principal at the university, has said any weakening of the EU ties through Brexit would lead to impoverishment way beyond the financial. Professor Sir Pete Downes up at Dundee University spoke of the risk of staff and students leaving the city because of a hostile Brexit vote. Anton Muscatelli at Glasgow spoke of the repellent effect of Brexit on researchers considering a career in the UK. This is important. He says that the effect is on researchers from across the globe, not just in the EU, because of the message that we have sent out. From the world-leading research carried out at St Andrews University to the cabbages and kale harvested from the surrounding fields, a hit to the economy, a hit to income tax from the businesses and workers, a hit to our world-class reputation in research and our world-class universities, a hit to locally grown quality produce in our shops, and a hit to our reputation in food and drink. Yet, there is an expectation with Brexit that immigration will be cut. There was Nigel Farage's breaking point poster during the campaign. There was Boris Johnson's warning that if we remained in the EU, 80 million Turks would flood over the borders. A mega opinion poll after the referendum found that 1/3 of Leave voters chose to back Brexit as they saw it offered the best chance for the UK to regain control over immigration and its own borders. It was the second biggest motivation for Leave voters. Without a cut to immigration, there will be fury, with the Leave campaign and the Conservative Party promises. Yet that very cut to immigration poses a direct threat to the country. The Conservative government faces a choice: damage the economy or admit they were wrong on immigration, risk the international status of our universities, undermine the potential of the food and drink sector, fail to address the shortage of workers to pay for our public services, undermine the sustainability of our society. And what is the alternative? For politicians to finally admit that there is a cost to cutting immigration. It is the centre of the Brexit debate, but it's not been talked about. This is a clash of conflicting priorities, and the government is making absolutely no attempt to explain to the British people they cannot choose both. That's got to change. There must be a debate. Government must face up to its responsibility. And the story of Brexit is a lesson for the way in which the UK should be governed going forwards. David Lord Steele, was right a fortnight ago when he said that the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament had not been treated well by the UK Government over Brexit. The joint ministerial committees haven't met. The devolved administrations haven't been involved in shaping the position. A lot of this is because the Conservative Government is too riven with factions to have a coherent position anyway. I subscribe, for what it's worth, to the theory that Clause 11 debacle is just a rush job mess by the Conservatives rather than a deliberate conspiracy. Nonetheless, powers were about to be grabbed. The heart of the debate is how we do have a UK-wide framework for devolved powers which is sensible for everyone involved. I think the answer is federalism. Federalism involves devolved administrations coming together to agree common frameworks. We should do more of it in this country. Most countries in the world do it, and they cannot understand why the UK seems so incapable of undertaking modern, common-sense governance. The key to federalism is that the different administrations all may have different priorities and nuances within a framework, but they all have an eye and a care for the success of the whole. This is where perhaps the SNP need to reflect. I think people would worry about whether the SNP were truly committed to the success of a UK-wide framework for anything. Their narrow political interest is to suggest that the UK cannot really ever be made to work. So whereas abroad federal administrations may argue fiercely to get the framework shaped to their needs, in the end, they will agree to something that promotes the common good. Nationalists might prefer to give the impression that the common good is impossible. So that breaks the mutual trust that is needed for federalism to work. So that's why I agree with my colleague Malcolm Bruce in the House of Lords a fortnight ago. Malcolm said, something like federalism will eventually have to be enshrined in our constitutional arrangement if the union is to hold together. When I asked Sir Ming Campbell to prepare a report on federalism in 2012, he argued for a distribution of powers among the nations of the United Kingdom for joint action where that is necessary and effective. There has been a new distribution of power since then. What is missing is the joint action. For example, the UK government published a UK industrial strategy without consulting any of the devolved administrations. Given that skills, enterprise support and business taxation are devolved, that sounds a ridiculous mistake to make. The UK policy is weaker because it does not promote joint action. And now, with the need to construct jointly agreed frameworks for returning powers, the UK government is caught out again. I think they can do better. In closing, I want to sum up some of the points I have made in previous years about how to build a successful long-term economic future for Scotland. The immediacy and urgency of Brexit means I'm not able to dwell on these tonight. That is the tragedy of Brexit. After all, the points I have made in previous years about the economic impact of our excellent universities, the financial services industries and food and drink exports are all at risk under Brexit. So those are at the front of my mind. At our heart, we want every individual to achieve their potential. To be a successful country, Scotland will need skills, talents and creativity of everyone who lives here to participate in the economy and society, to get a good job and to feel that they belong. It's a drive for participation and productivity. Diversity in education will be the twin engines that drive invention and creativity to enrich our country and provide a bright, liberal future. Business needs a Scotland where they can draw on the well-educated and trained talents of people from all backgrounds, with a government that supports education, innovation and science. To achieve these great goals, we must wake up to the threat that Brexit poses and the threat that choking off good immigration would bring. And we must seize the opportunity of a Brexit deal escape chute. All pro-Europeans must step up. The time is fast approaching. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Willie. It's always rather alarming as chair when your speaker's first sentence is that he's not going to talk about the topic he was given to talk about. So I'm very glad that you didn't go too off-piste and gave us a really clear articulation of Brexit and its implications. We will now move on to questions. We're going to take questions in pairs to allow as many questions as we can. I would ask you to be brief if you can and fairly succinct in your questions. And if you're from a particular organisation, if you wouldn't mind saying what organisation that is, that gives us a sense of the different people in the room. There are microphones as well, so if you could wait till a microphone comes to you, that'd be fantastic. We are going to start, though, as Alan said, with a question from the Young Academy of Scotland, so I'd like to invite Emma Boffey to kick us off. So you just wait for a microphone, it's just on its way.
Thank you very much for that. My question is about the Young Academy of Scotland. I'd be interested in your views on how organisations such as the Young Academy can make a practical difference for Scotland.
I'll let you answer that one before we go on to the questions.
Okay. Actually, it's partly by doing what you're doing. I think providing good quality evidence that is relevant to the political debate. Because to be frank, we get quite a lot of materials. If you come to my office, there's wads of it. Sometimes actually just emailing a simple paragraph with a basic point is actually much more powerful. It gets the message across to us, and we can try and push that through. The stuff that you've provided on case studies is first class, real live examples from real people. It's excellent. But it's looking at where the current debate is about to go and getting ahead of it as well. So trying to shape the future debate is another part of it. But we can have a longer discussion about some of the tools that you can use. But some of the stuff you're doing is brilliant. I have to say that Brexit paper you produced was excellent. The quality contributions from real people. Because us getting real examples sometimes is quite hard. So if you're able to bring it from real people in universities or wherever, then it's really valuable.
Thank you, Emma. Next couple of questions. There's two on this side. Gentleman in the second row, and then Alice on the fourth row.
Chris Carr, Edinburgh University Business School. Thank you, Willie. I completely agree. I just wondered if you could give us a little bit more on any really kind of politically realistic scenario for re-engineering a second referendum vote. I think I would use the term validation referendum to avoid sort of, annoying people, because effectively this is what it's about. Can we validate or not? But it seems to me the only feasible scenario is one under which the final Brexit solution is a very unpalatable solution. But it has to be so unpalatable that May thinks it will go down in the House of Commons. If she thinks it would go down in the House of Commons, it might then be preferable, rather than having civil war in the Conservative Party, it might be preferable to allow a validation referendum to, so to speak, say, right, well, we've done everything that we promised, but it's now over to the public for the final validation. So she might just do it. But the only chance of that is if Labour definitely comes in with you. And it seems to me that Corbyn wants to fudge it so it can go through, and then he just goes through with the general election, doesn't do anything about it, and wins with a fudge of a kind of a Brexit for jobs sort of thing. How do you get them on board?
Okay, thank you. And Alice, just behind too.
Following on from that question, and also from your response to Emma Boffey's question, where you said one thing the Young Academy can do, by the way, I'm from the Young Academy of Scotland, one thing the Young Academy can do is get ahead of the debate and change the debate. I want to ask, if there were a second referendum, a validation referendum, a public vote to accept or not, how would you and others, how should you and others ensure that that debate is better informed?
So how do we get the debate, and how do we ensure it's informed? How do we get the referendum? Sorry.
I actually think Ireland is the key to this. It's almost impossible to have a close relationship between Ireland and Britain, which is necessary for the Irish peace process, and have the divergence that some of the hard Brexiteers want. And that's where the nub comes. I think the Irish border is going to be one of the real tests. I talked about immigration, for instance. The reason why the common travel area in the United Kingdom and Ireland works is because Ireland, we don't really admit it, but Ireland and Britain have got broadly the same immigration policies. So it kind of works within a context of the European Union. As soon as you start diverging on immigration, and that's one of the desires of the Conservative Party, the more that becomes a real problem. So the whole issue about the Brexit resolution, I think, is on that border between the United Kingdom and Ireland. So that, I think that's part of the answer. It potentially could force Britain to be much, much closer to Europe. And it might actually end up with a situation is, why do we bother breaking up if we're going to be that close to Europe? And that'd be one of the ways of going back. I think the economic circumstances, another reason when people realise that they're already feeling the effect, but the more the economic consequences become clearer and people feel it, you've got to feel it in your pocket. It's part of the dilemma. You won't feel the full effects of Brexit until after Brexit. So how do you get them to change their mind before that happens? That's one of the real tests. But it is already happening, so some of that will come. And I think just the inability of the UK government to set out a clear position and being able to get everything that it wants, the cake and eat it stuff. So I think all of that will help. Will it happen? Don't know. But it's my determination to try and get the circumstances right so that it can happen, because we can't let this pass. I know people are furious with me whenever I raise this. I got more abusive emails today on the back of this contribution. But you've got to stand up for what you believe. The Labour stuff, I got a response today from a Labour Party supporter who said, of course Jeremy Corbyn, this was supporting Jeremy Corbyn, of course Jeremy Corbyn's not going to come out with a clear position on Europe. We need to win the next election. Okay, win the next election, forget about the future. That's fine. So, but that's the challenge. But there are more people in the Labour Party who are really upset about the direction of travel, and the frustration is becoming clear, and I fully expect more of them to speak out. How do we make sure that we're better informed next time? I think we are actually better informed now. We've been at it for 20 months, and I know it feels like we don't really make any progress, that it's just a Groundhog Day debate over and over again. But more and more facts are coming out about the benefits, for instance, on immigration, on the economy, on trade, on frictionless borders, and all that stuff is coming out. So we are more informed now than I think we were before. That was one of the benefits, I have to say, of the independence referendum. It's because it lasted so long. At the end of it, we did know more about our country than when we started off. The unfortunate thing about the Brexit referendum, it was really curtailed. It was quick. It was quick and dirty, really, and we never really got into the guts of it. And therefore, I think that lent itself to easy slogans on the side of a bus that were just repeated over and over again without being able to get the facts through. So I think we are already, because of the length of time, better informed. And it's a different question, isn't it? It's not, do you want change? It's, do you want to stop dangerous change? It's a different question now. So I think I think the potential is there for a more informed debate. That's the optimistic side.
Two more questions. David in the third row, and then one of the people in the fifth row back, first of all, please. So David here.
Hi. Empirically, you are correct about Brexit, not that that counts for much anymore. And as a party, as you identified, you're the only unequivocally pro-EU party. You know, the SNP are fudging it to some degree. Labour and the Conservatives are both basically supporting a hard Brexit. Does it frustrate you that your position is not reflected in the polls, either in Scotland or the UK?
David Torrance, journalist.
Sorry, I should have said that.
And
hi, this is Silvia Paracchini from the Young Academy of Scotland. So I wish I could share your trust and faith in a shift of public opinion and in an exit from Brexit outcome from a potential second referendum, but I'm not so sure. So,
Okay.
It seems to me that if there was the will, we would also have the numbers in Parliament for cross-party action in trying to stop it before it would come down to having to go to a second referendum. So why can't politicians work on that more closely? Why can't we stop it at Parliament?
Yeah. I would just deal with the second question first, Sylvia. I think it does come down to the party interest. There is a determination amongst Jeremy Corbyn's team to win the next election and do what is necessary to win the election. And the position does change from time to time. It kind of oscillates back and forward. So I'm hoping it might just oscillate a little bit more in this direction. I do actually think if we can convince the public, the Labour Party will follow. Now, you would hope with leadership that leadership might try and lead the country rather than the other way around. But if that's the way it has to be, then it has to be. But the opinion is shifting. The polls are showing that people think the deal will be bad. The polls are showing that people would like to have a final say. Now, there's still a lot of people saying, just shut up and get on with it. We voted. It's an outrage. Now, those very same people would not have given up if the result was the other way around, but they expect us to give up, even when the result was so narrow. But nevertheless, I think people are quietly changing. The real next step is to give them the confidence to believe that they should make those views known to their politicians so they feel the pressure. That's how we respond in Parliament. When we feel we get a lot of people contacting us personally, they say it in the street, that's the pressure that needs to build. So the practical steps to be taken is to give people the confidence. Lord Kerr was the first step, showing that it could technically be done. Second of all, was showing that Brexit was going to cost people in their pocket. And the third was to make sure that people had the confidence then to step up to say that they could have a final say. So that's what we need to do. I'm an eternal optimist. And yes, David, I am frustrated. Doesn't mean I'm doing anything different. I believe what I believe, and you know, you can give lots of examples over the time where Liberal Democrats have adopted positions that haven't necessarily given them electoral benefit, but we came into politics to do the right thing. I would like it to change, and I think, you know, if you look back at the Iraq War, I mean, our position, people don't remember this, but when the Liberal Democrats and others stood up against the Iraq War at the beginning, we were in a minority. People were heckling Charles Kennedy excessively in the Parliament, giving him lots of abuse because of his position, and it eventually became an overwhelmingly popular position. So I'm hoping it comes right in the end, but we do it because it's right anyway. So
I'm going to take Chair's prerogative for a minute, because I was listening to John Curtis earlier this year when he was talking on the latest Sir John, fellow of the RSE, and he was talking about the latest poll results that the National Centre and Scotland had done around Brexit. And one of the things I was particularly struck by was absolutely, as you say, that people were more likely to think there would now be a bad deal. But what he was reflecting, that their view on that was not that the decision that they'd made was wrong or the decision to leave was wrong, but that actually this was being implemented badly by the politicians. And I wonder if you've got any reflections on how that issue is tackled. And I think it comes back to Sylvia's point as well about trust, that actually a feeling that the politicians are almost deliberately screwing this up.
It's difficult to believe we could do it this badly. I mean, that might be the case. I think but it still does lead to the problem that you're not going to end up with a decent Brexit. So do you accept what the politicians are doing, or do you try and reverse it? So I think the end conclusion is the same, irrespective of what you think the motives are. Yeah. I mean, there is a real test here, because I think the immigration stuff, which I'm particularly fixated on, it was a major part of the campaign. But now the Conservatives hardly ever talk about it. And it needs to be flushed out. Or people, I know lots of people who voted for Brexit because of immigration. They will be frustrated if they don't get what they want. Now, you could say it's not directly connected to the EU, but people voted for Brexit almost as a proxy to bring it down. And if it doesn't happen, there will be problems. But if we do it, then it's not going to just damage the university sector and the food and drink sector, but our NHS is going to be struggling as well to get the workers that we need, professionals that we need, and then that sustainability of society, we're just going to be top heavy again. So I think that's the real nub of it, and the Conservatives are just ignoring it at their peril. They need to address it. They need to convince people that or they need to set out an alternative strategy for how the economy is going to grow. But so far, it's just wishful thinking. So, I don't know if that's answered the question or not, but yeah.
Two questions, one right down at the front and next to Alice, about 5 rows back, please.
And Pankot, there have been often observations about the level of civic debate. The question of moral leadership in a difficult context has come into the radio arena in the last few days for different reasons. How, therefore, do we get real moral leadership, dealing in fact, not fiction, not faction, not fudge, in the debate in these last few difficult months over Brexit? Because the leadership has got to come from parts of civic society as well as people like you who are doing it in your way.
Thank you. And 5th row back, please.
My name is Ian Doig, no affiliations. Thank you, Mr. Rennie, a very thought-provoking address, and I fully agree with your analysis of where you've got to. I think it's becoming increasingly apparent to people that they've been misled, they've been lied to, the emperor has no clothes, etc. I'd like you to have gone a bit further than just stopping Brexit. It's difficult to get people to vote up for something, to sign up for something negative. What is really needed is a strategy that goes beyond that. And I think there's a real opportunity somewhere for leadership that says, I don't think things can just go back to the way they were before and forget it. People have got so entrenched. What is the strategy that actually says we power out of this in a positive way?
Thank you. So 2 paired questions that were actually paired as well.
Moral leadership. I think good, vigorous political debate's a good thing. I think there's a real problem when facts are pointed out by authorities, the UK Statistical Authority, for instance, and yet politicians continue to use those arguments. The £350 million a week was the classic example. When kind of basic facts and arguments and arbitration isn't accepted, there is a real problem. But all they do is keep on repeating. And in fact, I'm reading Tim Shipman's book just now from the Times about the Brexit campaign, and they were delighted with the controversy around these things because it attracted even more attention. There was one particular trick that they used to use, is they would post up something controversial on on Twitter or Facebook, and it would create a storm. Then they would take it down without apologising, and people would say, oh, have they apologised or have they not? And then they would put it back up again on Twitter, and then there'd be another storm. So out of the one controversial story, they would get 3 stories. Really cynical about the use of the media to attract attention, a magnet on controversial issues. So facts don't matter. And it's a real challenge how you do that. I mean, for what it's worth, what I try to do is accept arguments that the other side make from time to time. So, for instance, on Michael Matheson's handling of the Chief Constable issue, I accept that if I was in his position, I would have done the same thing. Now, it would have been easier for me just to knock lumps out of Michael Matheson and said he was going behind everybody's back, he was nobbling the Chief Constable, but I didn't believe it. So you've actually got to try and get some common facts agreed in political debate in order for the public to have confidence, to understand. Otherwise, you've just got tribes. I mean, I know people who criticise me on Twitter now, they're all nationalists. All nationalists. I dig into it, and they're all SNP. And the bile that's associated with it, irrespective of how reasonable my argument is. And I try and make it reasonable from time to time. But they just don't accept. It's a tribe. And how do you get out of tribes? And Facebook creates those echo chambers where everybody just talks to themselves. The algorithms reinforce the arguments to themselves. So it's a real problem. I'm not saying it's easy. But I think what politicians have got to do, decent politicians, is accept the arguments that others make. You can still have a difference of outcome and political view on it, but you've got to accept some of the facts. Otherwise, public trust is just going to be shot. A strategy for beyond. I mean, that's what we try and do I have to say, every single election. I mean, I've tried to set up a positive vision for the future of the country by investing in education. I've argued that the best educational investment you can make is before the age of 3. I've said that you should be trying to invest in kids who are disadvantaged at school with a pupil premium or pupil equity fund in Scotland, that we should be investing in colleges, not just in universities. I mean, they've been pummeled in recent years. We should be investing in that. The core belief on that is by investing in the skills and talents of people, you can grow the economy and create a virtuous circle of growth. That's my positive vision. I want to invest also in the skills and talents of people by investing in mental health, by investing in people's well-being too. So at the core of that is a real passion for trying to make sure that the future of the country is a positive one by recognising the real skills that we've got. Creating an open, liberal, internationalist, outward-looking country that's positive, that thinks about, people who are round the corner, in other parts of the world or in the future, thinking about the sustainability of the planet. All of those things are critically important. Having a liberal, kind of optimistic approach to the world rather than the kind of sometimes dark, negative, aggressive politics that exists. That's the vision that I've got. Brexit just obliterates the opportunity to talk about those things. Completely obliterates it. When we're having to fight a rearguard action to maintain our close relationships with our neighbours, it's a real difficult one. But that's my positive vision for it. But you're right, I probably need to connect it more to the Brexit debate, make sure it's added on so that people know what they're going to get, that it's just not going back to the way it was before, because they were clearly unhappy about the way the world was. It was a kind of almost a 10-year delayed backlash from the recession, where people felt frustrated that those who were wealthy won the battle. The bankers didn't get punished, they didn't go to jail. Who really suffered? Nobody, but people who were less well off. So I think you're right, it's making the two connections is important. Sorry, that's too long an answer.
Thank you very much. More questions? So lady down here and further along, gentleman two along from that.
I'm Maria Darnells, Young Academy of Scotland and also EU immigrant. My question was, if we do get a validation referendum, what do you think exactly should be asked of people? Are we asking people to validate a deal? Or is the alternative to that no deal? Is the alternative to that cancelling Article 50? What is it exactly that should be asked? And something that you've said a couple of times and that really resonated with me is this idea that we can't go back to what was before, right? So no matter what, the relationship of the UK with the EU is going to be different. I would like to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Thank you. And just further along.
So my name is Javier Escudero, also member of JAS, also EU immigrant. So actually I think it's a very similar question. You were talking about tribes before. And sometimes I'm optimistic, sometimes I'm pessimistic about the public opinion swinging. But it seems to me that the Brexit vote was very divided between Scotland, London, and some of the bigger cities, the rural areas, the older, the young, the people who embrace globalization and those who doesn't, for whatever reasons. So if there's a validation referendum, how can we make sure that that heals society? Because it seems to me that the society, the fabric itself is a bit broken. So how can we make sure that this heals and doesn't divide society even further, going to even a third revalidation referendum or whatever?
So what's the ask in a validation referendum, and how do we ensure it brings people together, and what should the future of your relationship with the EU look like?
What I would have is a question: do you want the deal, or do you want to stay in Europe? That would be my preferred question, because it gives people an opportunity just to throw out the proposition that we should leave. Otherwise, you're ending up with a no deal, which isn't really specified. What is a no deal? Because, I mean, there's lots of countries throughout the world who've got deals or arrangements with Europe. And we suggest we're not even going to have those kind of deals. Of course not. You're going to have some kind of arrangement. Even the hard Brexiteers want an arrangement with Europe in some form. So I think it would be ill-defined and wouldn't help the debate. So it's better to say, do you want the deal? Because it's the best they could argue for. Or do you want to just go back? Would be my question. I'm sure not everybody will agree with me on that, but that would be my preferred option. I think the 2 points about making sure we heal society and what's next are all interconnected. I mean, one of the issues I think is important is recognising that some communities felt the pressure on the level of immigration. And it's recognising what the real pressures are, and the real pressures are on access to schools, access to your GP service, to your hospital. Because some of those communities were bursting and were feeling the pressure. So we need to have a special fund that makes sure we recognise the fluctuations in population. We need to recognise that and make sure we invest properly, rather than just assuming that the rest of the country can benefit from their taxes, but that community has to bear the pressure of a growing population. It doesn't matter where they come from. If there's more numbers there, that should be recognised. And especially because it's constantly changing, then that needs to be recognised too. So I think that's part of the answer. But the wider issue really is making sure that the inequality gap is closed, that people don't feel as if they've been left behind. That's a much, much bigger question. But that's not going to be solved by Brexit either. So we did have a long-term strategy that sets out how we're going to close the inequality gap. And part of that is investing in people. Part of that is investing in their skills, so everybody has an opportunity to succeed. So you can invest in skills and talents, you can improve their mental health, you can improve their well-being. That's part of the answer. Now, is that passionate enough for people? I don't know. Is that clear enough? I'm not sure. But the final thing in practical terms is making sure that we take the arguments into the communities that are feeling the pressure. So, I mean, it was astonishing. I was at my brother-in-law's wedding, and he works in a laundry factory service industry through in Glasgow. and a lot of his friends are from Poland, and his father and their family, brothers and sisters were all there. They were all voting for Brexit, and they didn't know anybody that wasn't voting for Brexit. And all the Polish community, obviously, if they'd had a chance to vote, they probably would have voted the other way. They would have wanted to stay in. But it was quite astonishing that they didn't know anybody, and they're almost living in a separate community. And it was the same on independence. You would go down a street and you would knock on a door, and somebody would say, I'm supporting the United Kingdom. And I don't know anybody, they would say, who's supporting independence. Then you go to the next door neighbour, who you obviously don't speak to, and they were supporting independence, and they said, I don't know anybody who's supporting the United Kingdom. And it was quite astonishing. But obviously their networks and friends were so isolated from everybody. Now, this is not universal, but there was large numbers of people who were just like that. So we need to break into communities to make sure that we're getting the arguments across on a personal level about the real benefits of these things and what it means for them. So that's practical.
More questions? Jeremy, right at the back. Say who you are, please, for others. And there's a question right here at the front as well.
Jeremy Pete. Thank you very much, Willie, and congratulations on maintaining consistency and hope in these difficult times. My question is very much around what others have been saying. Given the really disappointing leadership of the two main political parties at the UK level, which lack paying attention to the national interest and indeed lack honesty in a lot of instances, how can one achieve leadership which is cross-party and is genuine and realistic in order to work towards a parliamentary position which takes us forward the way you're suggesting and leads us with viable political parties for the aftermath, when at the moment we just don't seem to have genuine, thoughtful, honest, national interest related leadership there to take us to the next stages?
Thank you.
Hi, Tom Ward. I work in business. I wish very much I could share your optimism that having another referendum within 12 months from now is a feasible or realistic objective. I really wish I could. I'm afraid I don't really. So here's a suggestion, and I wonder why so few people seem to have taken it up, that we're now looking at negotiating a transition period of 2 years, which will probably end up being 5 years, while we try and sort out what our future relationship will be, where we'll have all of the obligations of membership, but not so many of the benefits of membership. Why don't we just take up Jacob Rees-Mogg at his own suggestion and say we'll just delay Brexit by 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years for so the transition period just becomes extended membership, which in substance will actually be slightly better than what we're now going for. But that then gives much longer for the people to decide that they have been misled and that another referendum would be appropriate. You need more time to get the right result. And that seems to me to be by far the simplest way of giving yourself more time.
Okay. Jeremy, I'm not so worried if there's viable political parties after this. I'm quite happy for them all to disintegrate and for us to come up and dominate the country for another 50 years. That would be ideal. But Chuka Amuna and Anna Soubry gave me great hope on Sunday. I thought the way they handled themselves on the Marshall was commendable, that they were prepared to put aside differences. They were probably a wee bit too cuddly at some moments, but they were quite clear that they thought this was so important that they were going to come together. And they're serious political figures, and I think that might give others the confidence to step up and do and say more about it. What it does to the political system, I'm not sure. This could have far-reaching consequences for how the political parties are established. It might break the mould of British politics, you never know. Maybe 20, 30 years after we had hoped it would happen, it might come. But it's a possibility, because it's such a monumental. And if you looked after the independence debate and the vote, the consequences were quite significant. You know, Labour going down to 1 seat after having dominated for so long in Scotland. I'm not saying that's going to happen south of the border, but, you know, with these big kind of totemic votes, these kind of binary votes, it's got the potential to do that. If you've got a 40-year relationship with your neighbours, it's not that easy to unpick it that quickly. And if you were a pragmatic civil servant, you're probably saying, give me time to work out exactly how to make this happen. That would then lead you to believe you would have a longer, maybe not, you know, a defined period, transition period, maybe not 2 years, but actually might vary from issue to issue, where you eventually change over time. So you might end up with what you suggest. My fear is you end up with a soggy mess, and we just drift along, and we've not really sent a message out to the world that we're boldly going in a buccaneering style across the world to do new trade deals, or actually are close to our neighbours and working in partnership. It's some kind of soggy middle, and it might just be just drift along and bumble along meanwhile our economy struggles. That's my fear about that process. But if you're a pragmatic civil servant, you'd be saying, give me time. Don't expect me to unwrap something that's been there for 40 years in just 2 years. It's just going to be impossible. So I can't see how they can do it very, very quickly. But I do think we need a clear position in the end. Time would certainly help us, and that might be the benefit. But I do fear about indecision, which I think that's what it would be.
Thank you. Further questions? Two on the right-hand side here.
I've not had a question from George yet, so...
And if you could give your name and organisation, if relevant, please.
George Brechin. I agree with you in terms of the impossibility of finding a solution to the Irish border. But my concern is that that debate surfaces and then disappears, surfaces and then disappears. And it is the kind of issue that if it does derail, as I think it will, it sets us up for 10, 20 years of claims of betrayal. So why are politicians in Great Britain not talking about the impossibility of a solution for the UK that answers the Irish border?
And just in front.
Mike Manderson, no affiliations. Just take you forward in a time machine, Willie. You're now head of the negotiations for readmission to the EU. What are the red lines which you would set on whether to be readmitted?
So the Irish border and readmission, no challenges there in either of those questions.
It's a good point, George. I mean, we have raised it. I think there is partly a conspiracy of silence on it, because both the Labour leadership and the Conservative leadership want to sound as if they're accepting the result. So because they know this is so central to the issue, they can't really raise it. You could argue that the Irish peace process has been a series of compromises over time that have just kind of washed over some of the fundamental differences, and you could argue that you could get through it again. But I think it's really difficult without the context of a European Union, because it set a framework, it set a playing field upon which you could try and resolve the clear disputes on the island of Ireland. So I think in short, there is a conspiracy of silence amongst the leadership, and it's up to people like myself to raise it more often, and try and get it up the agenda so people are prepared to accept it as being part of the major problem on the Brexit deal. Good question, really good question. I wish I could come up with an easy 3-point answer, but I don't have one. I think part of it is about making sure they're not going. I think the fundamental on this is that I think Europe want us to be a proper partner. They didn't like the half in, half out. And if they genuinely believe that we will be a proper partner for the future, the deal that they will try and strike won't be harsh. So we're not going to lose, I don't think, all the benefits that we've worked up over the decades, because they'll want it to be a proper lasting relationship, and they won't want to risk that, because they know a country of 60 million people on its border is actually not something that they want outside the tent, they want them inside. So I don't think the deal that they would try and extract would be that punitive. So I'm not convinced that it would be such a hard negotiation, because I think they would see the long-term benefit of the partnership rather than the short-term gains on a particular deal. But obviously, you know, money and immigration would be important. There's going to be issues around about rebates. How does that all work? Farming arrangements, the fishing industry, all of those will be critical ones, and making sure we get good deals for each of those industries. But I don't have an easy, trite answer for it. But it's the best question of the evening.
There's no prizes, by the way, just for that. Other questions? Alan, down at the front, and then there's one in the middle there as well, please.
Thank you. Alan Alexander, RSE and DHI. Willie, one of the things that troubles me about the arguments for a second referendum is that those who argue for it may find themselves in the position of being criticised for being against the referendum as a way of making decisions in a modern democracy, except when they're not against it. And I think that's a real difficulty, because those who argue for a second referendum are, I think, generally speaking, those who are against the notion of referendums in the first place. Secondly, and related, the great silence since the referendum has been nobody making the argument that referendums in this country are advisory rather than binding. Now, where you have that as a constitutional principle, and the likelihood today that there is a majority in Parliament, at least for a soft Brexit, maybe for more than that, how do we assert that sovereignty of Parliament, which was what, after all, we were supposed to be winning back?
Thanks, Alan. In the middle here.
Should the readmission deal be subject to a referendum?
Could you say who you are as well?
Michael Birch.
Thanks.
God, bloody questions. The danger of emphasising the advisory nature of referendums, that it de-risks the referendum question. If people think that actually it might not happen, then they might be tending to doing a more courageous, taking a more courageous position. So treating it as a negotiation rather than accepting the responsibility of the outcome. That's the danger. I don't know if you remember when Michael Moore, when he was Secretary of State for Scotland, suggested a second referendum on independence to look at the deal. In the end, it was roundly condemned at the time. And part of the argument was that it de-risks. So you end up with, well, actually what I'll do is I'll go for independence this time, and it'll force their hand to make them tougher in the negotiations to get a better deal with the rest of the United Kingdom. So we don't go out, but then before you know it, you've got the momentum towards independence, and you're ending up in the final position of independence, even though that might not have been what they wanted in the first place, and they were just treating it as a negotiation. So that's the problem with treating it as advisory. But then the other problem comes when it's so close. How do you really reflect the 48% in that outcome? And that's what sometimes is so intolerant about some of the people who are in favour of Brexit. They don't accept the 48% have a view. Now, so that's... no, I wouldn't have a referendum. I don't know where you would stop, but you would... That's why I think it would be important for the European Union to treat the whole process with respect, and perhaps accept the previous terms would be the way of progressing it. But you could end up with a never-ending series of questions that go on. So, but you have to draw the line somewhere, and I would draw the line there. Okay. If that would make sense.
Thank you much. We've got time for 2 last questions, if there are any. No final questions. I will hand over to Alan to give the formal vote of thanks.
Thanks very much indeed, Rebecca. I think we've had this evening a very clear, I think a very honest exposition of Willie's position. It's a brave man who comes in and says, I'm going to say the same thing as I've said in each of the last 4 years, but it was a very important and powerful point to make, I think, Willie, and I thank you for it. I think what I was struck by was the fact that you covered the economic issues that are concern us, the political issues that concern us, and the constitutional issues that ought to concern us. That in itself would elevate the debate beyond where it's been before. I myself am particularly sceptical about the use of referendums for anything, but I think we are where we are. So thank you very much on behalf of everybody here. It's very good of you to come and do this every year. We don't know at DHI whether this is something that we'll do in perpetuity, but you should perhaps assume that it is. So can I ask you to show your appreciation the usual way? Just a final point from me before I hand over to Alice to say something about the Young Academy. I think some of you will know that Sir Gerald Elliott, who was a great benefactor of the David Hume Institute, died about 10 days ago. His memorial service will be in, I think, at St Giles. Sorry, Greyfriars. I beg your pardon, I knew it was Greyfriars. At Greyfriars on Saturday the 17th at, do we know what time? 11. At 11 o'clock, and I assume it's all welcome. Yes? Thank you very much indeed. Alice, can I ask you to say a few words about Young Academy? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to speak on behalf of the Young Academy of Scotland this evening. And it's a great pleasure to hear that you have already enjoyed some of the work that we've done on Brexit, our Brexit report and the Brexit Observatory, which has been tracking the impact already felt as a result of Brexit on all sorts of people and their families. I want to take the opportunity tonight to draw attention just to one or two other strands of our international work. Brexit isn't the only thing we worry about or strive for. Most of the members of the Young Academy of Scotland reside in Scotland, but we strive to be outlooking in all of our activities, and we're very well positioned to do so. You've heard questions from all 5 members in the audience tonight, 3 of whom are members of the European Union, EU immigrants as they self-described. We're all members of the European Union currently. One of the most effective ways that we do this is through strong links with our sister young academies around the world. We currently correspond with young academies throughout Europe, North America, and Africa to exchange ideas and collaborate on shared projects. We send representatives to annual meetings of the European Young Academies and worldwide Young Academies. Our Young Academy members have been invited to speak at international events at the European Commission, the Canadian College of New Scholars, and the World Academy of Sciences. An example of one of the Young Academy of Scotland's projects to achieve change internationally is our At-Risk Academic and Refugee Initiative. In 2016, we introduced a special programme to induct refugee academics and professionals into our membership. It was the first programme of its kind in any Young Academy. The Global Young Academy is now bringing forward a similar initiative for their own recruitment process. And we've also written to our European sister Young Academies, explaining our initiative and urging them to explore the way they can support refugees in their own community. This is an initiative that we're very proud of, and we're committed to continuing it for at least 3 recruitment rounds. When we induct our new cohort, which we're doing right now, we hope there will be several new refugee and at-risk academic members in the group. Just to give you a flavour of what difference this scheme can make, I want to mention one of our at-risk academic members, who's a lecturer at the University of Mosul in Iraq. When ISIS took control of Mosul in 2014, they set about systematically destroying the university. They destroyed many of the departments, and they particularly symbolically destroyed the university library. At the time, it was home to thousands of unique manuscripts, as well as being a major research hub in the Middle East. It was the second largest research library in the Middle East. Like many other academics in Mosul, our Iraqi colleague fled the city as ISIS advanced, and he secured sanctuary in Scotland. And he applied to become a member of the Young Academy of Scotland as a way to meet fellow professionals and to engage with issues of concern to his host country. He has since returned to Mosul to begin the slow work of rebuilding his life and work there, and he has set up an initiative called Mosul Book Bridge, which is a charity focused on rebuilding and restocking the destroyed university library. Now, a number of YAS members are now working closely with him on this, and it's collaborations like this which illustrate the enduring nature of the relationships which our at-risk academic and refugee scheme can forge, keeping us connected and working together even when members are able to return to their home countries. I think I speak for all Young Academy members when I say that we will continue to invest in and be very vocal about the importance of international connections and collaborations for the action, the dialogue, and perhaps above all, the bridge-building friendships, that powerful social glue that they bring. And we will do so especially as we navigate perhaps a post-Brexit world. On the topic of friendship, I think it is now probably time to go and have a friendly glass of wine.
Can I just finish by reiterating the thanks to Willie and to the Young Academy who are sponsoring the drinks reception, but also to all of you for coming. We've had a very fruitful debate and discussion, I think, about 45 minutes of questions. So I think Willie's certainly earned his glass of wine, but I think you all have too. Thank you.